Good evening and welcome. Tonight we will be going over the history and geography of Babil in Iraq. And one neat thing about Iraq's governorates is that most of them are named after an important person, place, or thing in Iraqi history. So, of course, Babil is named after probably the most famous place in all of Iraq's history, and that would, of course, be Babylon. You can see is right here, just north of the town of, as we say in English, it would be Hilla, or I believe in Arabic it would be Al-Hilla. I hope that was close enough. I know I've got some Iraqi viewers out there. Let me know how I'm doing with pronunciation. But Babylon is, of course, part of Mesopotamia, which you can kind of see here, Mesopotamia, which is the land between the two rivers being the Tigris and Euphrates. You can see the Euphrates River flows right through here. It's all branched, as you can see here on this map. The Tigris is just a bit up here, but it's the Euphrates that we'll be able to see on Google Earth later in the video. And of course, Mesopotamia is very famous for its fertile farmland along these rivers. So most of the region that isn't this area here is pretty much farmland along the rivers there. And that's about it for geography, to be honest. But the history goes back pretty much back into the very dawn of human civilization, because Mesopotamia was the home of the first cities. Babylon was not the first, but it was probably the greatest in Mesopotamia's history. So many important stories and events happened here. It's almost too much to recount. I'm checking my notes, and I really didn't write very much down about Babylon's history because it's all up in my noggin. So, there were two periods of Babylonian history. There was like the original and the Neo-Babylonian, I guess, culture, where it was great and then it waned, was less important, and then became very, very important again. Probably the most important ruler of the first Babylonian period would have been Hammurabi. And Hammurabi is very famous for creating the Code of Hammurabi, which goes way back in my personal history. I'll tell you a little anecdote later. The Code of Hammurabi is probably, it's not the first, it's not the oldest, but it's probably the best known of the ancient laws of very early civilization. We found some little like codices things in Egypt and other parts of Mesopotamia. I think Assyria had a good list of laws. But the Code of Hammurabi is the best known because it's it's called a stele, a huge rock with all the laws written down. And I guess I'll tell you now, it's back when I was in 6th grade, so I was probably like 12. That was when we studied ancient history about Mesopotamia and Egypt and all that, ancient China and stuff. And we were each given a topic to go in front of the class and do like a 2 to 5 minute presentation on learn how to do public speaking. And I was given the Code of Hammurabi, and I'm like, cool, and I go to research it. And all that I really find is that it was written in Babylon by King Hammurabi, and it's where the term an eye for an eye came from. It was a list of laws, but also the punishments that went with breaking those laws, and they are quite brutal. They were very extreme compared to today. But then that was all that I had, and I really suffered for that week before the presentation, trying to figure out what else to say to take up time about it. And I resented it all through my junior high and high school years. And then when I graduated high school, I went to Europe, and I went to the Louvre, and I saw the coat of Hammurabi for myself. I probably should have dug up the picture. I took a picture with it because I recognized it instantly from that week in 6th grade where I just labored over trying to figure out how to talk about this thing for an extended period of time. So that's my personal story with Babylon and King Hammurabi. But I think all of the more famous stories about Babylon came from the Neo-Babylonian period. So in the time between the rise of Babylon and the second rise of Babylon, the Assyrians took over pretty much the entirety of Mesopotamia. Would have first been Sargon of Akkad, or Akkad. I'm not sure now. I think it's Akkad, actually. And the Assyrians who were farther north, that's why I keep pointing that when I'm talking about Assyria, conquered Mesopotamia. And then once that empire waned, then we had the Neo-Babylonians. And the most famous king of the Neo-Babylonian times would have been Nebuchadnezzar, who's mentioned in the Bible. He allegedly built the Hanging Gardens for his queen, who was from, I think she was from Media. So we're going to talk about it in the book tomorrow. Allegedly, she wanted to go back to her very lush homeland. So he constructed a huge, indoor-outdoor garden full of plants. But we don't really know what it looked like, what was in it, or if it was even real, because we have no evidence of it. All we know is that allegedly some Greeks saw it, brought the story back to Greece, and the word spread, and when the 7 ancient wonders of the world were, I guess, created, listed, the Hanging Gardens was included. But we don't know if it did exist, what happened to it, or anything like that. Yeah, but very, famous thing associated with Babylon. Also famous would be the Tower of Babel, which would have been way before this time. Again, allegedly, if it actually existed, it would have been the tower that was built to reach heaven, and according to the Bible story, where languages were invented from God trying to stop people from building a tower. So he changed everyone to speak a different language so they couldn't communicate. Another very famous thing Nebuchadnezzar did was ransack Jerusalem. He conquered a lot of area. And when he ransacked Jerusalem and burned down the Temple of Solomon, he captured all of the Jews living there and brought them back to Babylon as slaves. In the year 539 BCE, Cyrus the Great of Persia conquered Babylon, and he freed all the Jews and said, "You guys can all go home." And they did, and they rebuilt the temple, which of course would be destroyed much later by the Romans. But that was the end of the great days of Babylon as it was absorbed into the Persian Empire. So just to recap Babylon, it was one of the many cities. It would have been a city when it was first built, for sure, that sprung up in Mesopotamia between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the very first place in the world where farming communities sprang up, which turned into important cities, and each city was ruled by a king of some sort. And like I said, there were many different ones all throughout Mesopotamia, but Babylon is probably the most famous one. It had huge walls around it, and the Ishtar Gate in front. And we'll come back to Babylon in a minute. I guess there's one more story to tell about Babylon, and that was much later, in the 330s BCE, when Alexander the Great conquered Persia. He came through Babylon. I think he wanted to make Babylon the capital of his new empire once he took over Persia. He came through before he started to, I think he came through before he headed east to conquer more. He went all the way to India, what's now India today. But eventually he made his way back, long story short, and he actually passed away in Babylon. What happened to his body is a mystery. It's probably buried somewhere underneath Alexandria, Egypt, but we do not know. It's never been found. It could be buried under Babylon for all we know. But that's where Alexander's story came to an end, and where many other empires blossomed, because, like I said in the last video, I covered this, how the lands that he conquered were divided up among his many generals, and creating many different new kingdoms and empires and things. The Muslim conquest occurred in this area in the mid-7th century, coming up from the Arabian Peninsula here. And of course it's been Muslim controlled ever since. Hilla was established sometime in the 10th century, on the outskirts of what was once the greatest city in the world. And it was just kind of a little afterthought. Again, it was just farmers living their lives. Baghdad, as you can see, is just a hop, skip, and a jump away, so all of the great history in the area would have happened up here. Not so much here. We'll talk about Baghdad in 2 weeks, so be sure to subscribe. You don't want to miss the Baghdad video. There's not much else to say until the 20th century, after World War I. The area was taken over by the British. After World War I, all the lands that belonged to the Ottomans were divided up among the Allies, who had won World War I, and this area came under the control of the British. And I think that's when they were like, we should probably, excavate Babylon. There were many before then. In particular, I also mentioned this, the last video was about Baalbek, but the Germans really got into excavating the ancient sites in this corner of the world in the, from the 1880s, taking a break, and during World War I, of course, and then later into the 1920s. The Ishtar Gate, I'm pretty sure most of it is in Germany. I'm sure most of it's reconstructed, and I'm sure they painted it, but the original is gone. It's in Germany, I'm pretty sure. But one person who was very, very interested in rebuilding Babylon in the 1960s was Saddam Hussein, who was in control of Iraq at the time. And an understatement, he was a bit of an egomaniac. A bit, right? He was an extreme egomaniac. He decided to do two big projects here in Babylon. One was to try to rebuild as much of it as possible for tourism. And on one hand, recreating the ancient city of Babylon is a super cool idea. I know I would want to see that. The issue is that he built it on top of the actual site of Babylon. It's all a little to the left. But that whole site, most of it has not been excavated, and more is being found, even recently. So who knows what was destroyed, what was plastered over for the sake of trying to recreate it to make a tourist site, essentially. He built it, I believe he built it over the castle of Nebuchadnezzar, which we could have lost countless artifacts during that. But Saddam had another idea. He loved castles, and he built palaces. I should say palaces. There's a difference between a castle and a palace. He loved palaces, and he built palaces all over Iraq, and he wanted one in Baghdad. very similar to Nebuchadnezzar's palace. And he built a big, grand mansion, very much with little nods to Babylon here and there. For example, Nebuchadnezzar carved his name in every brick in his palace. So Saddam Hussein had his name engraved in every brick in his palace. I'm laughing because it's ridiculous in that he only stayed in this palace for one night, ever. And it's all decked out. It's super fancy, super extreme. It was so lavish, full staff and everything. He stayed there one night. He built it for clout, like he did most of his palaces. So you can imagine in 2003, when the United States and their allies invaded Iraq and overthrew Saddam Hussein, that place was looted. If you can go in there today, it's an abandoned building. It's all ripped apart. It's very vandalized, but you can still see some of the hints of luxury and frescoes and stonework in the walls. That place was stripped down, and it's all quite lost now. I'm sure artifacts in that palace are scattered all over the world at this point. But Babylon also sustained a lot of damage during the American occupation as well. Nothing on purpose, it's just there was a war and ancient sites were damaged during that. But the site did reopen in 2009. It's still open to this day. But the time kind of around that, especially from like 2003 to about 2006 or 7, it was a very volatile part of Iraq, as many parts of Iraq were at that time, with insurgents fighting back against the occupiers, attacking either soldiers, places where soldiers were stationed, or just attacking civilians. And that was very present in Hilam. The worst one, though, I think, was in 2016, and that was actually ISIL that was targeting civilians and I suppose any sympathizers, right? But today I was about to say it's a very safe place. It's not a very safe place, but it is a safe place. It's very much open to the public, and it's a very welcoming site, especially for tourists still. And you know what else I forgot? The UNESCO site. I'm getting really bad at that. We've got to read about the UNESCO site of Babylon before we head over to Google Earth, before I turn off the lights and we explore. So Babylon. It says, situated 85 kilometers south of Baghdad, the property includes the ruins of the city, which between 626 and 626 and 539 BCE was the capital of the Neo-Babylonian Empire. It includes villages and agricultural areas surrounding the ancient city. Its remains, outer and inner city walls, gates, palaces, and temples are a unique testimony to one of the most influential empires of the ancient world. Seat of successive empires under rulers such as Hammurabi and Nebuchadnezzar, Babylon represents the expression of the creativity of the Neo-Babylonian Empire at its height. The city's association with one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, the Hanging Gardens, has also inspired artistic, popular, and religious culture on a global scale. Can you believe this site was added in 2019? Feels like it should have been way longer than that. Let's take a look at their gallery here. So here you can very clearly tell what was rebuilt and what wasn't. You can see the walls here are definitely new. This would have been the Marduk Gate. But the ground here are the ancient roads, so you can see these walls built right next to it. This is the Lion of Babylon. Very famous statue. It's located outside the city. And there aren't a lot of pictures here, is there? my goodness. So then I guess we're just gonna have to hop over to Google Earth and look for ourselves. Let's go. In the time that I got up to turn out the lights and turn this on, I choked on my own spit, had a coughing fit, tore up my throat. So I have a cough drop in my mouth to help relax so I can finish this video. My goodness. Nothing's ever easy, is it? So here we can see Babylon Governorate, it says, or Babil. And I'm zooming out to show you exactly where we are in the world. So here you can see Iraq. We are right smack in the Middle East, the area is known as, right? We have Iran over here. Down here is Saudi Arabia. Kuwait, very famously bordering Iraq. Jordan and Lebanon nearby. Turkey to the north. And you can see the desert landscape. That's very closely associated with the Middle East and Syria. I left out Syria. Did I leave out Syria? Yeah, I left out Syria. But then you can see this area here, right? And it's formed by these two rivers, the Tigris, the Euphrates, meeting here and creating this big, lush valley. And this is the heart of Mesopotamia. Technically, Mesopotamia stretched way farther up here. But you can see from above that this is where everything is much wetter, easier to irrigate, easier to grow crops, right? So let's head on in. You can see how nice and green and lush it is here. Let's just pick a random spot. Like, let's head down here and look at all this. Lots and lots of farmland, and you can see the river right there. And like I said, it does splinter off in various little irrigation creeks and things. It's just from above we can very clearly see the Euphrates there, can't we? So, I had that tagged just so I could find it. But we're going to start. Here's Hilla, which I really didn't find anything terribly interesting. Google Earth does mark a bunch of Shia shrines, but we're more interested in Babylon. You can see there's lots of little spots, like I found this Hammurabi tourist city, which is, let's take a look, clearly built to attract visitors to come to this little carnival. It looks like there's like shopping and hotels and things here. Just something for tourists to do while they're stopping by Babylon. Which is kind of fun. Kind of reminds me of Orlando. How there's always something around every corner. But up here we have the ancient site of Babylon. And here we go. I'm just going to switch the view to, oh, you have it on everything. That's how I got tagged. Okay. Make sure it's on everything because then it's pointing out all of these little sites because we want to see them all. So we should really start, I think, up here. See, here you can see the Ishtar Gate, but I think up here is a better view. So look at this. This is the reconstruction, as you can tell. Built smack dab in the middle of this archaeological site, which is wild. There's also a little tourist spot over here, a little resort, food, all that kind of stuff. We'll talk about that in a minute. But outrageous, right? Let's take a look at this one, Ishtar Gate. So here is what we imagine the Ishtar Gate to look like, and here is the reconstructed one. My very first thought when I saw the picture was like, we have Ishtar Gate at home. The Ishtar Gate at home. It is nice, okay. They did a good job. There's the lion. You can see there's a man down here getting wrecked by the lion. Or what's left of it, at least. And here you can see dragon. That's represented a representation of the god Marduk. See, on all of these bricks, you'd have to look close. I wish I could zoom in, but they all say either Nebuchadnezzar's name or something about him. So here's the old road. You can't walk on. They've built these so you can look at it, but you obviously can't walk on the old road there. Some excavated sites here, not too far from the rebuilt ones. And lots of depictions and signage all around about what life was like here in Babylon, the ancient city of Babylon. It's just really fascinating. Like here, here's a very famous. I think it's a map of, I think, just the area, Mesopotamia. But like, this was where once upon a time, people lived their regular, boring daily lives in one of the greatest cities ever. And you think about how, like, nowadays, a lot of people watching this live in big cities. Just living your regular everyday life. In like 4,000 years, are people going to look back on, how New York City used to be, or I'm in Reno, Nevada, how Reno used to be. Be like, wow, people once walked around. There's all the ancient, signage and old buildings. I don't know. It just kind of, I don't know what it is. It does something inside of me that I can't really describe, apparently. It just makes me think about the human experience in general, I suppose. So one thing that the tourist industry here did was guess where the gardens and the Tower of Babel were. Again, we don't know this. Anyone's guess is as good as anyone else's. Here's what, if the Hanging Gardens were real, that's probably what it looked like. You can see the Tower of Babel over here. Here's a good brick. Old cuneiform writing in it. But yeah, go away there. And then the Ziggurat of Babel, which would have been, the Tower of Babel. What we think it would have looked like, right? If that was real as well. I'm sure there was a ziggurat, but we really don't know how real the Tower of Babel story was. So what I'm ignoring in some of those slideshows, because I wanted to show you it separately, was the Babylon Palace. So you can see here on this big hill, it's a palace built for Saddam Hussein. Now let's take a look. See, this would be kind of impressive if it weren't for Saddam Hussein, right? Because it kind of shows the whole history of Iraq. It's a pretty cool ceiling painting. So yeah, it looks almost like a ziggurat, doesn't it? And it's all detailed and intricate, of course. Big view of the river. You can see all the graffiti on the walls. Apologies if any of those were like nasty swear words. I can't read Arabic. Not a lot of... Oh, there goes my cough from. The gardens there. Big view of it from over here. So yeah, this was all built just in case Saddam had an itching to come spend the night in Babylon and pretend he's an ancient Babylonian king. Which apparently he only did once. This is a better slideshow. But yeah, look at all the details there. There goes my cough drop if you're with the crunching. A big ballroom here of some kind. Maybe even like a prayer hall, I don't know. Everything all detailed, of course. And now it's ruins. And I think the government's thinking about turning it into a museum. Look at the floors too. Which would be a pretty cool museum. I think it would be cool though if they put actual artifacts, maybe if apparently these are all in Arabic, some cursive, I guess what would be S and H, right? It would be cool if they could get artifacts from around the world that were stolen from this place in like the late 1800s, early 1900s, to put in museums. They could bring it back and house them here. I think that would be cool. But that's just my idea. So that is about it, I think, I wanted to show you. Let's pick another site to end the video at. The Jardin de Babylonia. How about the cool old Greek theater there? That's a cool little site. Let's look at actual what we've managed to uncover for the most part. You can see here, just like this was once upon a time, this was the biggest city in the world, and this is it now. I guess we could look at the lion. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy this style of content, please consider subscribing. That's an old photograph there. You can still see its head. Next in my series, we're going to be heading back over to Vietnam, which you guys really enjoyed the video I posted last week in Vietnam, so thank you. There are 4 regions of Vietnam. Look at this cute baby. Oh my gosh. 4 regions in Vietnam that start with Bac, which I think means north. So we're going to be covering all those in one big video. So it'll probably be a big one. So be sure to subscribe so you won't miss out. I hope that you found this video to be relaxing and educational. Look at baby. That's a weird shot there. How does it look? I'm gonna ruin my setup here. Editing me is gonna be really mad. And why did they crop that photo so weird? I don't know. I hope that you found this video to be relaxing and educational, and I hope that you have a good night. Good night. Good night.